Hey, sleepy listener. Welcome to Sleeping Podcast. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments. And if you're ready to drift off, like and subscribe. And let's begin. The room was wrapped in quiet, the kind of quiet that feels as though it has been here for centuries, patiently waiting in the corners. Moonlight lay across the floor in long, pale ribbons, touching the edges of the walls, gliding over the folds of the blanket, resting gently on my hands where they lay still by my sides. The air was cool yet soft, the sort of coolness that settles into the skin without urging you to move, only inviting you to notice it. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the shelter of my home, the faint hum of the night breathed steadily, the low murmur of air moving between trees, the barely there rustle of leaves shifting against one another, the subtle creak of branches in the slow rhythm of their own ancient dance. I lay there for a long moment, neither fully awake nor fully dreaming, simply feeling the weight of the world in its most peaceful form. I had known many nights, but this one felt different, as though the sky itself were leaning closer to listen. There was no wind to carry a message, no clear voice in the room, only a whispering sense within me, a wordless impression, a quiet call that rose not from my ears, but from somewhere deeper, like a ripple moving across the surface of still water. It was not urgent. It was not loud. It was simply there, a presence, a suggestion, as though the night had placed its cool hand on my shoulder and waited. I did not ask what it meant. I did not question why. I simply breathed in and felt the space around me expand, as though the walls of the room had grown transparent, and I could feel the slow, endless shape of the world beyond. My gaze drifted toward the window, where the moonlight fell most generously. It seemed brighter than it had any reason to be, spilling across the glass in silver shapes, painting shadows across the floor. I thought of stepping toward it, but for a moment, I simply lay still, enjoying the weightlessness of not having yet decided to move. The whisper inside me did not fade. If anything, it became gentler, as though reminding me that I was not in a hurry, that the night would wait as long as I needed. At last, I let my body respond to the invitation. I rose slowly, each movement unhurried, feeling the shift of my weight from the mattress to the floor. The air changed against my skin, cooler now that the blanket was no longer wrapped around me. I placed my feet upon the floorboards, bare soles meeting the smooth, faintly warm wood that had stored the day's sunlight. The touch was grounding, connecting me to something older than myself. The room seemed larger as I crossed it, not in distance, but in feeling, as though every step took me deeper into a space I had walked through countless times, but never truly seen. Shadows stretched and folded, bending around the edges of furniture, softening each corner. Even the stillness seemed to grow richer, as though the silence were a living thing breathing alongside me. When I reached the window, I paused, with my hand resting lightly on the frame. Beyond the glass, the sky was not simply dark. It was a deep, velvety expanse, the kind of darkness that carries warmth instead of chill. Stars glimmered in every direction, scattered in patterns I could not name, but felt I somehow knew. Some shone brightly, crisp points of silver, while others were faint, as if hiding behind the thinnest veil of cloud. Together they formed a tapestry so vast that I could almost imagine falling into it without fear. I stood there, breathing in the sight, letting my eyes wander from star to star. The whisper in my mind had softened further now, like a melody that had found its place in the background. I felt it not as words, but as a subtle pull, a drawing outward, as though the horizon were offering a hand. It was not the kind of call that demands. It was the kind that waits patiently, knowing it will be answered in time. The coolness of the glass under my fingertips reminded me that I was still here, in my own room, in my own life. And yet, in the quiet between heartbeats, I sensed that I was also somewhere else, somewhere just beyond the edge of the familiar. The thought did not bring fear, only a steady curiosity, softened by the knowledge that wherever this path might lead, it would move at the same slow, measured pace as the night itself. I lingered there, letting my breathing match the rhythm of the world outside. Inhale, and the stars seemed to grow brighter. Exhale, and the darkness between them deepened, embracing the light all the more tenderly. The moon hung low, casting its silver light in a way that made the earth seem both near and far, solid yet dreamlike. I could almost believe it was leaning closer, watching with quiet understanding. A part of me wished to remain at the window forever, to stand in the gentle presence of this night until the first pale light of morning crept in. But the whisper was still there, and though it asked for nothing more than my attention, I could not ignore it. I knew it would not leave, not because it was insistent, but because it was part of me now, woven into the slow pulse of my thoughts. The stillness wrapped around me like a second skin. I felt no need to rush. The journey, if that was what it was, had already begun the moment I opened my eyes and felt the weight of moonlight on the floor. And so I stood in the half-lit room, letting time stretch, letting the edges of the moment blur, until I could no longer tell where the night ended and I began. Outside the window, beyond the soft reflection of my own face, I began to see it. A thread of brightness laid gently upon the ground, winding away into the darkness. It was not the light of a street lamp or any familiar glow. It shimmered faintly, as though the moon had poured a thin stream of silver dust across. I stood for a long moment, gazing at it. The path was not urgent, not demanding my feet at once, but it was steady, waiting. There was a patience to it, the kind of patience only the night possesses, as though it had been here for ages, carrying its quiet invitation for whoever happened to notice. My hand rested lightly on the windowsill, and I felt a soft pull inside, not toward adventure or discovery, but toward a deeper stillness, one step at a time. When I finally stepped outside, the air met me like a cool silk shawl, draped gently over my shoulders. It wrapped around me without haste, flowing against my skin with the ease of water in a slow stream. I breathed it in, letting the scents of the night bloom quietly in my awareness. The sweetness of jasmine, lingering like a whispered memory. The faint herbal fragrance of something wild growing unseen. And carried almost imperceptibly, the silver trail began at my feet, brighter now that I was upon it. I stepped forward, the earth beneath me soft, accepting, almost warm, despite the night air. Each footstep sank slightly into the ground, and the sound was nothing more than the faint sigh of soil and grass shifting under my weight. I found myself moving as though I might disturb something if I went too quickly. My body naturally falling into the pace the path seemed to want. Around me, the world was hushed. The distant hum of the air lingered. But here, within this ribbon of light, there was a deeper quiet, the kind that carries its own kind of music. The gentle rustle of a leaf's edge, the nearly silent drift of petals moving in the darkness, the slow rhythm of my own breathing. My footsteps matched it, without effort, each step a soft exhale into the earth. The silver trail wound gracefully, curving through small clusters of flowers that leaned slightly toward its glow. Their petals were closed for the night, yet their scent drifted freely, mingling with the coolness of the air. The jasmine was stronger here, its sweetness balanced by the faint spice of some other blossom I could not name. I reached down once to touch a petal, its surface cool and smooth like a drop of night captured in velvet. The trees lining the path stood tall and patient, their trunks pale in the moonlight, their branches stretching overhead like the slow arch of a cathedral. Between them, the silver dust continued forward, sometimes broadening into patches that shimmered as I stepped across, sometimes narrowing so that I had to place my feet with care. Yet always it drew me onward, not with urgency, but with the steady promise of something waiting beyond sight. As I walked, I noticed that the stars above seemed different here. They felt closer somehow, as if they had descended a little to see me better. The more I followed the path, the more numerous they became, their light clearer, sharper against the velvety darkness. There was no hurry in their shining. They glowed the way a candle burns in a windless room. Steady, calm, unending. The scent of the flowers deepened, and I could feel it settling into me, the way fragrance sometimes feels as if it moves through the body, not just the air. My breath slowed without thought, and the ground beneath my feet felt more and more like an extension of myself. I could no longer hear anything but the faint, natural sounds of the night, the shifting of grass, the tiny murmur of leaves brushing together, the whisper of my own clothing as I moved. The path began to widen, the silver light pooling ahead as though spilling into a larger space. I slowed, though my pace was already unhurried, letting the widening light reveal itself at its own rhythm. Step by step, the trees gave way to an open clearing, and there, the night unfolded in full. Above me, the stars were no longer far pinpricks in an unreachable sky. They seemed near enough to touch, suspended in the air like lanterns, each one glowing with its own gentle warmth. There were more than I had ever seen in one place, layers upon layers of light, scattered across the dome of the heavens, until the darkness between them seemed as delicate as lace. I stepped into the center of the clearing, my feet sinking into the soft, cool grass. The silver path faded here, as though it had carried me exactly where I was meant to stand. I tilted my head back, letting the stars fill my vision until nothing else remained. Their light was not blinding. It was soft, like the glow of remembered dreams, each one pulsing faintly, as though in time with the quiet beat of the world's heart. The air here was lighter, easier to breathe, carrying the perfume of night-blooming flowers in a way that seemed to fold time into itself. I felt as though I could stand here for hours, or perhaps only moments, and it would all be the same. The stillness unbroken, the stars unending. My eyes lingered on their slow shimmer, and in that quiet space, the whisper I had felt earlier returned, softer than ever, not urging me forward now, but letting me rest beneath this sky that had drawn itself closer just for me. Beyond the clearing, where the silver path dissolved into the grass, the land sloped gently downward. I followed without hurry, my feet sinking into the softness with each step, the cool fragrance of night still resting on the air. The slope led me toward a dim glimmer ahead, not bright, not sharp, but a muted glow, like the memory of light caught in still water. The trees parted slowly, as if drawing back their branches to allow passage. And there it was, a small harbor, so quiet, it seemed to be holding its breath. The lake stretched outward into the night, its surface perfectly still, smooth as polished glass. It did not reflect the world as it was, but the world as it might be in a dream. Every star above lay mirrored there, each one trembling faintly, as though the water itself was aware of being gazed upon. The moon hung low, casting a pale path across the surface, and for a moment, without thinking, I stepped inside. The wood gave slightly under my weight, steadying itself, holding me as though it had always expected I would come. I sat down, my hands resting on the sides, and before I could wonder how we would move, the boat began to glide. There was no oar, no paddle, no push from the shore, only the smooth, soundless motion of wood over water. The harbor slipped away behind me, its edges fading into the shadow of trees. Ahead, the lake opened wide, the mirrored sky drawing me deeper into its embrace. The lantern's glow painted a narrow ribbon of gold across the dark surface, though even that light seemed gentle, careful not to disturb the reflections. The stars trembled in the water, rippling as we passed, yet never breaking apart, as if the lake knew how to hold them. even in motion. I leaned slightly over the side, watching the sky beneath me. It was strange, and yet perfectly natural, to feel as though I were sailing not upon water, but through the heavens themselves. Each ripple felt like a breath, the lake exhaling slowly, as though we were sharing the same rhythm. The night air touched my face with its cool hands, carrying with it the faint scent of the shoreline I had left behind. Flowers, moss, and something older, like the deep scent of wet stone. The boat moved at a pace that felt beyond time. There was no sense of urgency, no destination that needed to be reached quickly. Every moment stretched into the next, so that I could not tell if minutes or hours had passed. The water's surface, so still and reflective, seemed to erase the very idea of distance. The far shore, if there was one, remained hidden in the dark, allowing me only the present, the soft creak of wood beneath me, the steady glow of the lantern. I let my hands rest on the sides, fingers lightly brushing the surface of the water as it passed. It was cool, but not cold, smooth as silk, yet with a quiet strength beneath. When I drew my hand back, droplets clung to my skin, catching the lantern's light in tiny glints of gold. They slid away slowly, leaving behind a faint, pleasant chill. The air grew softer as we moved further into the lake, almost as if it had been sifted through layers of dreams, sounds that might have existed. The call of a night bird, the rustle of reeds, faded into nothing before they could reach me. Even my own breathing seemed quieter, more distant, as though the night had drawn it into its rhythm. I felt a heaviness in my eyelids, not from fatigue, but from the deep stillness that had settled around me, a stillness that seemed to reach into my very bones. Now and then, the boat would pass over a place where the stars in the water aligned perfectly with those in the sky. And for an instant, it felt as though there were no water at all, only a continuation of the heavens, with the boat sailing between them. Those moments came and went without warning, each one leaving behind a deeper sense of calm, as though the lake were gently reminding me that above and below, I was held entirely in light. Somewhere ahead, though I could not see it yet, I sensed there would be another shore. But the thought did not pull me forward. It simply existed, like the knowledge that dawn would one day come. For now, there was only the smooth glide of the boat, the soft touch of night air, and the quiet pulse of the world mirrored all around me. I sat still, letting the boat carry me as it wished, and in that perfect motion, it seemed that both of us, the boat and I, had found a place where time could rest. The boat carried me onward, unhurried, as though it knew the way by heart. The water beneath was so smooth, it seemed less a surface than a quiet expanse of glass, holding the weight of the sky with infinite care. My eyes wandered upward, then downward, unable to tell which was the true heavens and which was their reflection. Somewhere between the two, I drifted, balanced in that delicate space, where the world feels both endless and contained. The movement was barely noticeable, a slow gliding passage that seemed to happen not through distance, but through changes so subtle they might have been imagined. The stars above shifted almost imperceptibly, sliding into new constellations, as though the lake itself were tilting in its vast cradle. The moon's reflection lengthened, then shortened, then stretched again, its silver light breathing with the water's gentle sway. Each sound was soft and measured. The faint creak of the boat's wooden ribs, the whisper of water touching its sides, the smallest splash when I trailed my fingers over the edge. I listened to the repetition, the rhythm steady as a heartbeat. It became the sound of my own breathing, in and out, slow and deep, the rise and fall so natural that I could no longer tell if I was following the lake or if the lake was following me. Somewhere behind me, the far shore I had left had melted into darkness. The world was reduced to this: water, sky, the wooden vessel beneath me, and a lantern's dim glow resting at the bow. Even the trees that had stood sentinel at the edges of the harbor were gone from sight, leaving only the luminous sprawl of stars and the low arc of the moon. Time became unimportant. The night was not in a hurry, and neither was I. I felt the air on my face, cool and light, like the faint touch of silk drawn across my skin. My shoulders softened, my hands lay still, my thoughts slowed until they were little more than gentle impressions, drifting in and out like distant clouds. The boat glided on, and I noticed how the scenery, if it could be called that, was changing in a way too gradual to measure. The black of the sky grew deeper, more saturated, as though the night was thickening, folding in around me. The stars seemed lower now, larger, as if their light were bending closer, curious and unthreatening. I could have reached up and imagined my fingertips grazing their cool fire. Once in a while, the water would catch a sudden glimmer, a ripple of silver that traveled outward and vanished without sound. It was never clear where these came from. Perhaps the breath of some unseen wind, perhaps the shift of unseen life beneath the surface. But they came rarely, like the smallest reminders that even stillness contains motion. I let my head tilt back, closing my eyes to the sky. The air was so still that I could hear the echo of my own breath inside me, a slow and steady tide. Inhaling felt like drawing the night into my body. Exhaling felt like giving it back. It was a rhythm I could have kept forever, without thought, without effort, as natural as the way the boat moved across the lake. It was only after some unknowable time that a new light began to appear ahead. It was not sudden. It grew like the faintest blush before dawn, spreading gently at the seam where water met sky. My eyes rested on it, not straining, just noticing as it swelled. Slowly, the light took shape, not the golden warmth of the lantern at my bow, not the silver of the moon, but a pale, pearlescent glow that seemed to belong to the earth itself. The far shore was revealing itself in pieces. At first, only a suggestion of land, a faint line between sky and reflection. Then, as we drew nearer, a fringe of grasses came into view, their slender blades luminous, as though lit from within. They swayed in perfect unison, though the air around them was utterly still. The glow in their stalks was not bright, but it was enough to cast a soft sheen over the water, turning it into a field of shifting silver and pearl. The boat slowed as if in deference to this place, its movement becoming almost imperceptible. When at last the bow touched the shore, the sound was no more than the sigh of water brushing against wood. I stood slowly, the boards beneath my feet warm, as though they held the memory of all who had stood here before. Stepping over the edge, my bare feet met the velvety ground. It yielded slightly beneath my weight, springy and soft, like walking on layers of moss and fine sand woven together. The luminous grasses brushed lightly against my ankles, leaving behind a faint tingle, as if the glow within them was not just light, but a kind of quiet welcome. I paused there at the edge of the lake, turning once to see the path I had crossed. The water behind me stretched away into the dark, still holding the mirrored stars, the moon's long reflection, and the trace of the lantern's golden thread. It seemed an entire world away now, yet also as though it would be waiting for me if I turned back. The air here was thicker somehow, not heavy, but rich, a fullness that settled in my chest and made me want to move slowly, carefully, as though not to disturb it. I took a deep breath, and the scent of the grasses filled me, cool and sweet, with a hint of something I could not name, something that seemed to belong to dreams more than to waking life. I stood for a while longer, letting the glow seep into my eyes, into my skin, until I felt entirely a part of this quiet shore. Somewhere ahead, the land opened into shadow, but I did not look beyond it yet. The lake's crossing was still in me, the rhythm of water, the hush of the boat's glide, the slow drift of stars above and below. It moved through me like a tide, unhurried, infinite, carrying me deeper into the night. The grasses parted without sound as I stepped away from the lake, their pale light dimming gently behind me, as if to let the night ahead take its place. The ground rose in a slow incline, each step carrying me higher into a stretch of open land bathed in muted silver. Before long, the shapes around me changed, blades of grass giving way to blooms, closed tightly in their own deep, unbroken rest. The meadow spread wide in every direction, a sea of sleeping flowers whose petals held the quiet of centuries. They stood motionless in the still air, their heads bowed slightly toward the earth, as though each was lost in a private dream. Even without the sun, they seemed content, their colors softened to a gentle haze under the moon's watchful gaze. The air was rich with fragrance, so soft it seemed to arrive in slow waves. Lavender lingered the longest, its cool sweetness wrapping around my senses, calming each thought before it could fully form. Beneath it, the warmer, rounder scent of chamomile drifted upward, like the last sips of tea left to steam in the quiet corner of a room. Interwoven with these was something stranger and sweeter, an aroma I could not name, delicate as spun sugar, but touched with the freshness of rain. It made the air taste like memory. I let my steps slow even more, though they had been unhurried from the start. My fingertips reached out toward the nearest bloom. The petals were cool against my skin, smooth in a way that felt almost liquid. as though they might melt into the night if I held them too long. I brushed my hand gently over one, then another, the touch so light it was more a suggestion than a contact, as though I were learning the shape of silence through touch. The ground beneath me was soft and pliant, giving under my steps as though encouraging me to linger. Each footfall left no mark, the earth closing itself gently behind me, returning to its perfect stillness. Even the sound of my movement seemed to dissolve before reaching my ears, as though the meadow had drawn a curtain of quiet between me and the rest of the world. Time here was different. It didn't pass in minutes or hours, but in the way shadows shifted slowly across the petals, in the way the moonlight deepened and softened over the contours of the land. Each moment seemed to stretch, lengthening like warm honey poured in a slow, golden ribbon. My breathing fell into rhythm with it, long and easy, each exhale carrying away the small remnants of thought still clinging to me from the crossing of the lake. I wandered between the flowers without choosing a direction, letting the path form around me in gentle arcs and curves. Sometimes the blooms grew taller than my waist, their stems strong and slender, their closed faces turned slightly toward the glow of the moon. At other times, they clustered close to the ground, small and tender, as if holding their dreams more tightly. I touched them all with equal care, feeling the slight variations in texture, some like satin, some like soft paper, some so fine they seemed almost to dissolve beneath my fingers. In the stillness, I began to imagine that each flower held a story, kept folded inside its petals until morning. The lavender might carry dreams of faraway hills, the chamomile perhaps of quiet kitchens and warm hearths, and the strange sweet blooms of places I had never seen but could almost picture. I did not need to know them. It was enough to walk among them, to share their rest without disturbing it. Occasionally, a faint breeze moved through the meadow, too soft to be felt on my skin, but strong enough to stir the fragrance anew. It would drift in slow spirals, weaving around me before settling back into the air. In those moments, the scents seemed to blend more deeply, until I could not tell where one ended and another began. The air became a single, seamless perfume, something both grounding and otherworldly. The sky above was wider here than at the lake. The stars scattered in greater number, their light spilling freely over the land. Their reflections did not rest in water now, but in the dew clinging to each closed bloom, tiny points of far off through the soft haze of moonlight. I noticed something faint, a glow, subtler than the lake's reflection, steadier than the shifting starlight. It was not urgent or bright. It simply waited, a quiet promise in the distance. I could not tell if it was near or far, for the meadow's dreamlike space made distances blur. But I felt its presence, the way one feels the approach of morning long before the first light. For a while longer, I remained among the sleeping flowers, touching their cool silk, breathing in their layered scents, letting the air and the earth and the sky merge into a single stillness. The glow on the horizon did not grow or fade. It simply existed, as though it would be there whenever I was ready to follow. And so, with steps as slow as thought, I began to move toward it. The flowers leaning slightly in my passing, then returning to their rest, their dreams undisturbed. The faint glow I had seen earlier gradually gathered shape as I walked, the meadow's sleeping blooms swaying almost imperceptibly on either side of me. At first, it was no more than a haze in the air, a shimmer in the distance that might have been no more than moonlight settling thickly over the land. But step by slow step, it grew into something more defined, a tall arch standing alone in the field. Untouched by wind or time, it rose from the earth as though it had always been there, its base cradled in flowers that leaned toward it as if in silent reverence. The stone was pale, not quite white, not quite gray, but shot through with veins of silver that glimmered faintly whenever the moonlight touched them. The surface seemed impossibly smooth, yet there was an ancient weight in its presence, as if countless nights had passed beneath it without ever changing it. I paused a few paces away, simply looking. The gate had no door, only the arch itself, framing a piece of the meadow beyond. And yet the space it enclosed felt different. The air past it seemed thicker, as though layered with some invisible depth. I could not see what it was made of, but I felt it in my skin, in the slower rise and fall of my breath. Stepping closer, I ran my fingers along the side of the arch. The stone was cool, but alive, like water, deep in the shade. The silver veins seemed almost to hum, though no sound reached my ears. I lingered there, my palm resting on its surface, and in that quiet contact, the night seemed to gather around me more closely, folding me into itself. I stepped forward. Crossing the threshold was not like walking from one place to another. It was like sinking gently beneath the surface of a still pool. The air beyond the gate felt heavier in the most delicate way, as if filled with something unseen but benevolent. My steps grew slower without my deciding, as though the ground itself wished me to take my time. The sound of my own breathing seemed softened, wrapped in layers of hush. Even the faint sigh of the flowers behind me faded, until I could no longer hear them at all. The silence here was not empty. It was full, textured, as if made from the quiet beating of distant wings, or the hush of snow falling in a place without wind. Before me stretched a wide path of moonlight, as though the moon had poured a long ribbon of its glow directly onto the ground. It wound forward gently, unbroken, drawing my gaze onward. The grass on either side was darker now, shadowed in deep silver blue, making the path's brightness seem even more serene. Above, the sky had changed. It was no longer the same soft velvet I had walked under before. It had grown richer, deeper, like an endless well of indigo scattered with countless stars. They shone more vividly here, their light steady and clear, as though they were nearer. And low on the horizon, just beyond the line of the path, a planet hung in the night, pale, glowing softly, its edges blurred by the faint haze of its own light. It was larger than any star, yet gentle in its radiance, not demanding the eye, but drawing it slowly, steadily, until I could not look away. There was a quiet pull to it, the same way a still lake draws the gaze of anyone who comes near. I began to walk again, my steps barely more than a drift along the path. Each footfall seemed to echo faintly in the ground beneath me, not in sound, but in sensation, a ripple that moved outward in silence. The air carried a subtle coolness, not of wind, but of open space, of distances too vast to measure. It touched my skin the way moonlight touches water, leaving no weight, only presence. The further I went, the more the gate behind me seemed to dissolve into the night. When I glanced back, it was barely visible, its pale stone melting into the silver of the meadow, until it seemed it had never been separate from it. Ahead, the path continued without haste, leading me toward the low horizon, where the pale planet waited. I did not wonder how far it was. Distance no longer felt like a thing measured in steps, but in the slow unfolding of the night itself. The planet might be near, or it might be infinitely far, and somehow both felt the same. The quiet deepened. I could feel it now, not only around me, but within me, as though my own thoughts had slowed to match the pace of the stars. My heartbeat felt softer, each breath more spacious, as though my body was learning the rhythm of this part of the night. Somewhere above, a thin veil of cloud drifted lazily across the sky, lit from beneath by moonlight. It passed in front of the pale planet for only a moment, and in that moment, the glow seemed to shimmer more brightly, as though it had noticed me too. I followed the moonlit path onward, the weight of the world I had known before, fading like a dream on waking. Here, there was no hurry, no measure of time, only the steady pull of the light ahead and the soft embrace of the night around me. It began without my asking, without my willing it, a subtle unmooring, a loosening of the invisible threads that held me to the path. One moment, I was walking on the wide ribbon of moonlight, the silver grass whispering faintly on either side. The next, the ground no longer felt as certain beneath my feet. It was not that I had stepped away from it, but rather that the night itself had lifted me, as though the air had quietly decided to carry me forward in its own way. There was no push, no pull, only a gentleness, a steady lightness that drew me upward without effort. My body felt unburdened, almost transparent, as if all that had ever weighed me down had been set aside somewhere I would never need to retrieve it. I looked down and saw my shadow stretching long and pale across the path, thinning at the edges until it blended with the light itself. The stars above, or perhaps now the stars around me, seemed to shift their places, sliding past with the slow, graceful certainty of drifting ships. Each one gleamed as though freshly polished by the night, steady in their glow, unhurried in their movements. Their presence was neither cold nor distant. Instead, they felt close enough to touch, like companions who had been waiting patiently for my arrival. Ahead and slightly above, the pale planet I had seen earlier now seemed nearer, its glow softened by some unseen veil. I could make out the gentle gradations of its light, Not a single solid brightness, but a layered radiance, like countless threads of silver woven into a single vast fabric. It did not loom, it welcomed. I drifted toward it, though the motion was not entirely forward. It was as if I were spiraling in the air, following a path made of curves so wide and smooth that I could not see them, only feel them in the subtle turning of my body. There was no sense of falling, no tug of gravity, only the serene knowledge that I was being carried toward a place I was meant to reach. The air itself had changed. It no longer wrapped around me like a shawl, as it had earlier. Now it seemed to hold me within it, to cradle me the way still water cradles a leaf. It was weightless, cool, but not cold. And when I breathed it in, it was like inhaling quiet light. I passed through the first veil of cloud. It was not a cloud in the way I had known them before. Not damp, not heavy. Instead, it was a drifting mist, silvered by the planet's glow, so fine and delicate that I felt it only as a soft, fleeting brush against my skin. It lingered for just a breath before slipping past, leaving a faint coolness in its wake. The next cloud came slowly, like a thought forming in the distance before arriving, and this one seemed to curl gently around me, its tendrils gliding across my arms, my face, my hair. Each veil passed more slowly than the last, and through them, the planet grew larger, its light filling more of the space around me. The spiraling motion continued, not in haste, but with a patient rhythm, like the slow turning of a seashell in a quiet current. I could see now that the surface below was not shadowed, but softly luminous, as though it held its own steady light rather than reflecting another's. As I descended, the texture of that light became clearer. It was not uniform. There were gentle swells and valleys of brightness, places where the glow gathered thickly, and others where it thinned to reveal a soft underlayer of deeper silver. From this height, it seemed almost like an ocean of quiet radiance, unmoving yet alive. I breathed in again, and the air was different still, richer, more layered, carrying with it the faint scent that reminded me of distant rain and something sweeter, like night-blooming flowers whose names I did not know. The scent seemed to say that I was almost there, that the space between myself and that luminous ground was steadily dissolving. Another veil of cloud passed, this one thinner, and I realized I could now make out the gentle rise of shapes on the surface below. Not sharp or jagged, but rounded, softened by light, as though the land had been carved from calm itself. They glimmered faintly, and I imagined that if I touched them, they would feel like the inside of a seashell, smooth and cool under my fingertips. The air's spiral began to loosen, becoming a straight and steady drift downward. My pace slowed further, as though the final moments of descent were meant to be savored. I let my eyes remain open, wanting to take in every detail of this approach. The way the clouds now floated far above me. The way the light on the planet's surface seemed to reach upward in a quiet welcome. I felt no threshold when I crossed into the planet's air, only a deepening of stillness, as though I had entered a place where even time moved more softly. The luminous ground was close now, its glow spreading out in all directions, unbroken, like a great, calm breath waiting to be taken. And then, without any jolt or break in motion, my feet touched down. The surface yielded just slightly, like grass made of light, supporting me as though it had known the weight of my step for as long as it had existed. I stood there for a moment, looking around, breathing in the quiet. Above, the stars were still visible, but the pale planet's glow was now all around me, not just ahead. It was as if I had arrived inside the heart of a dream, one that had been calling to me long before I had known how to hear it. The sand was the first thing I noticed, pale and fine, as if it had been sifted endlessly by some patient hand. It gave beneath my feet like cool powder, holding the faint warmth of light without heat. Each step left a shallow impression that lingered longer than I expected, as though the shore wanted to remember my passing for a little while before smoothing itself again. The air here was unlike any I had breathed before. It carried no sharpness, no salt. Yet there was something of the sea in it, a quiet vastness, a depth I could not see but could feel. I lifted my gaze and saw the water stretching outward in a gentle curve, so dark it was almost black, yet glimmering faintly with silver flecks that moved in slow, deliberate patterns. The waves themselves were barely waves at all, caught in the edge of motion, rolling forward so slowly they might have been frozen. I could watch their shapes for minutes without them changing, as if time itself here had been slowed to match the heartbeat of sleep. And the color, not blue, but a deep velvet purple that seemed to drink in the starlight. It was the color of faraway twilight, the color of the sky just before night fully claims it, and it seemed to hum with a quiet gravity, drawing my thoughts inward. The faint sparkle across its surface was not sharp like diamonds, but soft, as though the light had learned. Behind me, the land curved upward into a gentle rise, where trees grew in loose gatherings. Their trunks were long and slender, pale as moonlight, with leaves that shifted in the faintest breeze. Though it was not wind that moved them, but something softer, a current of sound. Each leaf hummed a single note, low and steady, so quiet it was almost imagined. Yet together, their countless voices formed a sound like a lullaby from another lifetime, one I could almost remember. The sound did not press itself forward. It waited, patient and unbroken, letting my own breathing fall into rhythm with it. I stood for a while, simply listening, until the line between my breath and the music seemed to blur. I began to walk along the shore. The sand shifted beneath me in an even, unhurried way, each step sinking just enough to be felt. The shoreline curved with no sign of ending, bending out of sight, but never narrowing. Now and then, a piece of driftwood, pale and smooth as bone, lay half buried in the sand, its edges worn into gentle curves by time and tide. The water kept its patient rhythm beside me, its slow waves folding forward, their edges tipped with faint light. The sound they made was so soft, it felt as if it might dissolve if I focused on it too much. A hushed exhale, a whisper of movement that belonged as much to the air as to the sea. The trees remained within sight, their luminous leaves still weaving their steady note into the night air. I noticed that the hum shifted slightly when I passed, not in volume, but in tone, as though the forest were subtly greeting me. I did not turn toward it. I simply let the sound follow me, a constant companion at my side. The shore itself felt endless, not in the way of something vast and unreachable, but in the way of something safe, a place without edges, where I could walk for as long as I wished, knowing that no matter how far I went, I would still be held by the same quiet, the same soft air. The night here did not deepen or change. It simply remained, steady and full, like a hand resting gently against my shoulder. I found myself breathing more deeply, more slowly, without deciding to. Each breath felt as though it drew not only air, but the calm of the place into me. My thoughts too had slowed, becoming wide and still, like the water beside me. Nothing hurried here. Not the sea, not the trees, not my own mind. After some time, though time here was a word that felt too sharp, I paused to look outward again, toward the deep violet water. I could see small sparks drifting beneath the surface, rising and falling in slow arcs. They might have been living things, or simply fragments of light caught in the current. Watching them was like watching dreams pass beneath my feet, too quiet to disturb, too far to reach. The sky above mirrored the water's patience. Stars were scattered thickly, yet their light was soft, as if filtered through some invisible fabric. I could not tell where the horizon lay. Sea and sky seemed to have agreed not to mark the boundary between them. I kept walking, not to reach a place, but simply because the act of moving here felt like breathing. Each step was unbroken by thought, each sound a gentle thread in the larger weaving of the night. The sand, the hum of the leaves, the slow motion sea, all of it seemed to lean toward rest, toward quiet, toward the slow settling that comes before sleep. It was then I realized that I too was part of this rhythm now, my footsteps marking a beat within the greater stillness, my breath a soft echo of the shore's own breath. I was no longer simply walking on this planet. I was walking with it, as if the land and the sea and the air had made room for me in their endless, unhurried motion. The shore stretched on, and I followed it, knowing it would never run out. The shore's pale sand faded into firmer ground, where soft earth met my steps with a muted welcome. Ahead, the trees rose tall and slender, their trunks the color of quiet moonlight. They stood so close together that their branches intertwined, forming a canopy through which the night's silver glow filtered in long, shifting beams. I felt myself slow before I even entered, not from effort, but from the hush that seemed to emanate from within. The first step into the forest was like stepping into a deeper layer of silence. My foot touched the earth, and the sound, that faint, familiar pressure of movement, drifted outward and returned to me a moment later, softer, as if it had traveled far and was bringing back only the gentlest part of itself. I paused, listening. When I drew a breath, the quiet inhale came back to me too, tender and thinned, like a feather passed hand to hand until it was barely there. Every sound I made, the slow brushing of my sleeve against my side, the faint shift of sand still clinging to my shoes, even the murmur of my heartbeat in my ears, came back altered, not diminished, but transformed. These echoes didn't repeat the sound exactly. They reshaped it, smoothing its edges, removing any weight, as though they were returning not the sound itself, but its memory, softened by time. I walked deeper, each step carrying me farther from the shore's quiet hum, and deeper into this forest's own language. Leaves stirred above me, the motion slight but audible. A moment later, the forest returned the sound, not exactly rustling now, but a kind of whisper that felt more like meaning than noise. I couldn't understand the words, if there were words, yet I knew what they conveyed, a reassurance, as if something here was telling me, "You are safe, you are welcome, you may rest." The moonlight here was different. It didn't spill in open pools as it had on the shore, but threaded itself through the branches in long, shifting ribbons. It touched the trunks in pale streaks, glancing off their smooth bark so that they seemed faintly luminous, almost translucent in places. I could see the patterns of the bark, like veins of silver, winding upward into the higher reaches where the leaves moved slowly, as though underwater. Every so often, I would pause and listen without moving. In those still moments, the echoes shifted. Without new sounds to repeat, they seemed to reach further back, carrying fragments of earlier noises. My footsteps from minutes ago, a branch creaking somewhere far away, the soft sigh of wind that had passed through before I arrived. Time seemed to loosen here. The past was not gone. It drifted gently behind me, catching up in waves. I noticed my pace slowing, without thought or intention. The forest seemed to ask for it, not with force, but with a kind of patient gravity. The more slowly I moved, the more deeply the echoes seemed to settle into me, not just returning my sounds, but blending with them until I could not tell whether I was hearing myself or the forest's voice. The path was not marked, yet my feet seemed to know where to go. Between the trunks, the ground was smooth and free of obstruction, covered in a low, soft growth that brushed against my shoes. When I bent to touch it, the sound of my fingers grazing its surface returned to me a heartbeat later, hushed and almost shy. Somewhere above, a bird gave a slow, single call. The forest sent it back as if in reply, a sound not quite the same, as though the echo had been cradled and warmed before being set free again. The deeper I went, the more I felt my own thoughts echoing as well. Memories surfaced quietly, not sharp, not urgent, but softened, the way an old photograph fades until it becomes more feeling than image. Moments I had almost forgotten drifted through me like faint light between leaves, here only for an instant before fading again. I kept walking, and the echoes became less about sound and more about presence. I began to feel as though there were others walking beside me, not seen, not separate from me, but accompanying me in the same way the forest did, repeating not my noises, but my quiet. At some point, I realized the trees were beginning to thin. The silvery trunks stood farther apart, and the moonlight reached the ground in wider beams. The echoes here grew fainter, not because they were fading, but because there was more space for the sounds to drift before returning. I stepped through the last close gathering of trunks, and the forest gave me one final whisper, a breath-light repetition of my own last footstep before opening outward. Before me stretched a wide plain, its surface glowing as though lit from within. The ground shimmered faintly, each blade of grass holding a drop of silver light at its tip. The air here was open and deep, carrying the stillness of the forest, yet also something broader, something that reached farther. Behind me, the forest stood tall and watchful, holding its gentle echoes for whoever might wander through next. Ahead, the glowing plain waited, patient and infinite, beneath the unblinking stars. I stepped forward, leaving the last threads of my own voice behind, ready to follow the quiet into the open night. The plain stretched out before me like a quiet ocean of light, its surface rippling faintly under the touch of the night. Above, the stars hung lower than I had ever seen them, their brightness softened, as though they had drawn closer not to dazzle, but to comfort. And then I noticed some of them were moving, drifting downward in slow, unhurried arcs, like snow that had forgotten how to fall quickly. Each star was small, no larger than a petal, and glowed with a gentle radiance that felt warm even from a distance. They floated toward the earth, as if the air itself were guiding them, cradling their descent so that they never rushed, never wavered. When the first one landed near my feet, it touched the ground with no sound at all, dissolving instantly into a faint shimmer that clung to the grass like morning dew. I took a few careful steps forward. The ground beneath me was soft, the blades of grass cool against my skin when I bent to touch them. Another star fell, this one landing on my shoulder, where it rested for the span of a slow breath before melting into nothing, leaving behind only a trace of warmth, as if it had thanked me for letting it stay a moment. More and more of them descended, and soon I found myself standing still, surrounded by their silent drift. Some brushed against my hair, leaving faint glimmers that faded only after I moved again. One landed in my open palm. I watched it dissolve like a sigh, so delicate I wasn't sure I had really felt it at all. The air here seemed to match their rhythm. My breathing slowed without thought, falling into the same gentle cadence as the stars' descent. A steady in, a steady out, like the tide of light itself. Each inhalation brought with it a cool sweetness, carrying scents I could not name, as if the stars themselves held fragments of faraway gardens. Each exhalation felt as though it carried away not only air, but any weight I still carried within me. In the quiet, I began to hear a sound, not quite music, not quite wind. It was a tone so soft it might have been imagined, a hum that seemed to pulse with each falling star, as though the night was singing in a language too old to translate. I stood there for what could have been minutes or hours. The plain gave no sign of time passing. There was only the slow snowfall of stars, the soft shimmer of their parting touch, and the way the world seemed to pause for each one. Eventually, I noticed something far in the distance, a low hill, softly aglow, its light deeper and steadier than the scattered shimmer around me. It did not call out, but I felt its quiet presence pulling me, as though it had been waiting for me all along. The path to it was not marked, but I began walking, letting the stars guide me. They seemed to drift more thickly along my way, as if leaning toward my steps. The ground was still soft, but here and there my foot would press into a patch of shimmer where several stars had dissolved together, and it felt like stepping on warm, powdery light. As I moved, I found that the stars did not stop falling. They followed me, landing on my arms, my shoulders, my hair, each one a brief, luminous companion before melting away. And though they were countless, I felt as though each one noticed me, as though each fall was a small act of connection between sky and earth. I paused once more when I was halfway to the hill. Here, the air seemed even stiller, as if the entire plain was holding its breath. I closed my eyes, and I could feel the stars landing without seeing them. The gentle tap on my sleeve, the slight weight on the crown of my head, the faint warmth on my skin before it was gone. I let them come and go, each one dissolving into the night, leaving me lighter than before. When I opened my eyes again, the hill was closer, though I could not remember taking a step. Its glow was unlike the stars, steadier, as if it held a light that had been burning for a long time without dimming. The stars continued to fall. The closer I came, the more the shimmer on the ground grew, until each step sent faint ripples of light outward. I walked slowly, my breath still matching the fall of the stars, until I reached the foot of the hill. Standing there, I looked back across the plain. From here, it seemed like a living thing. The slow drift of light from above, the soft, vanishing touch upon the earth, the endless breathing of night and sky together. I felt as though I had walked into the center of a dream that did not belong to me alone. The hill waited in silence. I placed my hand on its glowing surface, feeling its warmth seep into my palm. The stars still fell around me, but now they seemed farther away. The hill rose gently beneath my feet, its slope so gradual, it felt less like climbing and more like being lifted. The grass underfoot was unlike any I had touched before. Each blade glowed faintly, not with the cold shimmer of the stars, but with a soft, golden warmth that seeped upward into my soles. It was the warmth of something alive, something ancient and patient, as if the hill itself had been waiting for this moment. With each step, that warmth traveled higher, through my legs, into my chest, until my whole body felt wrapped in it. The light was steady, never flickering, and it seemed to guide me without a sound. The air here was thicker, but not heavy. It was like breathing in a lullaby, the kind that lingers at the edge of sleep. At the top, the slope leveled out into a wide, open crown. The grass here was shorter, softer, almost velvety to the touch. I lowered myself slowly, sinking into it as if it had been shaped exactly to fit me. The moment I lay back, the hill seemed to accept me fully, its warmth rising to meet the weight of my body, until I could no longer tell where I ended and it began. The sky above stretched endlessly, not just in height, but in depth, as though I were gazing into an ocean of night. The stars were not fixed points here. They moved, shifting in slow, intricate patterns I could not predict, but somehow understood. Some drifted together, merging before separating again. Others traced faint arcs, leaving trails of silver that slowly faded. Watching them was like reading a language older than memory, a language I had once known and was now only beginning to remember. My thoughts came and went in the same slow rhythm. They did not arrive fully formed, nor did they leave sharply. Instead, they drifted, half-formed memories of places I might have seen in dreams, scents I could almost name, faces that turned toward me only to dissolve into light before I could speak. None of it felt important to hold on to. Each thought was like a passing cloud, noticed and then gone, leaving only the stillness beneath. Somewhere between one breath and the next, I realized the boundaries between myself and the world were loosening. The grass beneath me was not only under me, it was part of me. The warmth I felt was not being given, it was already mine, simply flowing where it belonged. Even the stars seemed closer now, their soft motion echoing the slow pulse of my breath. The hill cradled me. That was the only way to describe it. There was a subtle sway, so gentle I might have imagined it, yet it was there. A rocking so slow and steady, it could have been the movement of the entire planet, or perhaps the quiet heartbeat of the night itself. Each sway carried me deeper inward, though I could not tell if I was moving towards sleep or towards something even quieter than sleep. The patterns in the sky began to change. At first, I thought it was my eyes drifting shut, but no. The stars themselves were bending, forming curves and shapes that reminded me of waves, of wind through tall fields, of the path I had walked to get here. I followed those patterns without effort, letting them lead my gaze outward until there was no distinction between what I saw and what I felt. Every so often, a slow silver star would drift lower than the rest, passing just above me before continuing its path. I imagined I could reach up and catch one, though my arms felt too heavy to lift. Still, I sensed that if I wanted to, the star would come to me, not because I pulled it, but because everything here moved toward where it was meant to be. I closed my eyes. Inside the darkness, the same patterns continued, etched in faint light across my mind. Thoughts became dreams without the need for sleep to begin them. Dreams became memories without the need for the past to have happened. I was here and I was elsewhere, and both were equally true. Time lost all meaning. The air, the grass, the hill, the stars, they were all part of one slow, endless breath, and I was inside it, not as an observer, but as one of its many shapes. I could have stayed like this forever, not because I wished to cling to it, but because there was no such thing as leaving. Even if my body rose from the hill, even if I walked away, I would still be here. The hill rocked me again, and in that subtle motion was a promise that it would hold me for as long as I needed, and longer if I wished, that I could let go, not into sleep alone, but into something deeper, a dreaming that had no edges, no beginning, no end. I let my breath matched the hill's sway. In as the stars drifted apart, out as they came together again. In as warmth filled every space within me. Out as it spread back into the hill, into the sky, into the night. Somewhere far away, or perhaps just a little beyond the next breath, a new light began to glow. Softer than the stars, yet somehow drawing them toward it. I did not rise. I only lay there, letting the glow reach me in its own time. The hill's cradle swayed again, and I sank deeper. The world and I no longer separate, no longer counting moments, only drifting, only being, only dreaming without end. The river appeared as if it had been waiting for me, not rushing toward its destination, not pulling me along, but flowing with the calm patience of something that had been here long before I arrived and would remain long after I was gone. Its surface was not like ordinary water. Instead, it glowed softly, the light shifting with every slow ripple. It was as though the moon herself had poured a part of her silver heart into the current, letting it travel gently through the night. Each movement caught and reflected the starlight above, weaving sky and water into one continuous ribbon. I began to walk alongside it. The path was not marked, yet it was clear where my feet should fall. The ground here was smooth and slightly damp, as if it remembered the touch of water long ago. The air was cooler near the river, and I could feel its shimmer, not just with my eyes, but with my skin, as though the light had a temperature of its own. Now and then, a pale mist drifted upward from the surface, rising in soft tendrils before unraveling into the night air. When the mist touched me, it didn't feel wet. It felt like the moment before a sigh, that tender stillness that lingers after breath. It wrapped around me loosely, never clinging, carrying a faint scent that was not quite floral, not quite mineral, but something in between. The sound of the river was steady, low, and even, like the slow breathing of a sleeping world. It was not a babble or a rush, but a single continuous note, deep enough that I could almost feel it in my chest. The rhythm began to match my own steps until I could no longer tell whether I was walking to the sound or the sound was adjusting to my pace. Occasionally, the river curved inward, drawing me closer, so near that I could lean down and trail my fingertips along its surface. The water parted easily under my touch, the silver light breaking and then knitting itself back together without a trace. It left no wetness, only a faint coolness that lingered on my skin. I wondered if the river's glow was something I could carry with me, though I knew it would never be taken, only shared when I was here. The banks sloped gently, their edges soft, with low, silver-leaved plants that seemed to drink in the glow. Every now and then, a single petal or leaf would loosen and drift toward the water, where the current would accept it without hurry. The plant and the river would share a quiet moment together before the leaf was carried away, disappearing into the curve ahead. A little further on, the mist thickened. It curled low over the surface and spilled onto the path, wrapping around my ankles like a slow-moving tide. The more I walked through it, the more it seemed to quiet my thoughts, as though the mist was not just air, but something meant to soften the mind. My steps became slower, not from effort, but from the desire to notice everything. The way the moonlight rippled across the current, the faint shimmer that lingered in the air after the mist dissolved, the steady, hypnotic hum of the water's voice. At times, the river narrowed and the sound deepened, resonating like a soft drumbeat. At other times, it widened until I could no longer see the far bank, and the sound stretched into something so gentle, it felt like silence itself. In those moments, it was easy to imagine that the river was endless, winding through every dream and every quiet night. As I followed its turns, I noticed the stars above were moving again, slowly shifting into new arrangements. Their reflections floated on the river's surface, so perfectly clear that it was hard to tell where the sky ended and the water began. Sometimes a star would seem to drift down into the river, merging with its silver light, as if the current were carrying pieces of the sky to some hidden destination. The air grew softer, the night deeper. The path beneath my feet became almost soundless, each step absorbed by the cool earth. I felt lighter, as if some part of me had already begun to float with the current, even while my body stayed on the shore. Far ahead, faint and small, I began to notice something new, a cluster of lights in the distance. They were not sharp or bright like fire, but round and gentle, like lanterns seen through a veil of mist. They didn't flicker. They glowed steadily, each with its own quiet pulse, as though they were alive. The river, without changing its pace, was leading me toward them. Every curve brought them a little closer, but never too quickly. There was no sense of urgency, only the quiet certainty that I would arrive exactly when I was meant to. I paused for a moment, standing still at the water's edge. The silver glow reflected upward, painting the underside of the leaves above me. The mist drifted around my legs and arms, a soft companion. The river's hum continued unbroken, as if reminding me that its flow would always be here, whether I walked beside it or not. Then, with a long, unhurried breath, I continued on, following the bend that would bring the distant lights into clearer view. The current whispered beside me, and the stars above leaned closer, their reflections keeping pace on the shimmering surface. Somewhere ahead, beyond the next turn, the cluster of lights waited, patient as the river itself, and I walked toward them, feeling the cool shimmer still resting on my skin, carrying the sound of the water with me like a lullaby I would never forget. The river's curve brought me closer to the distant lights until their shapes began to separate and take form. What I had first taken for scattered lanterns revealed itself to be windows. Small, round openings glowing with a warm, steady light. As I approached, the air seemed to grow softer still, the mist thinning until the village lay before me, like something remembered from a dream I had once half forgotten. The houses were unlike any I had seen before. They had no sharp edges or straight lines. Instead, they rose from the ground in soft, rounded shapes, like smooth stones left to rest for centuries in a gentle stream. Their walls glowed faintly from within, not with the harshness of fire or the pale chill of the moon, but with a muted warmth, as though the light had been breathed into them rather than lit. The roofs curved low and seamless, blending into the night as if they were grown rather than built. The narrow paths between the houses were lit, not by lamps, but by the glow that spilled softly from each dwelling. As I stepped into the first lane, I began to notice movement, slow, deliberate, unhurried. People moved along the paths, their steps as light as if they floated just above the ground. They walked with their eyes half closed, as though they were dreaming, and the dream itself was guiding their way. They did not speak, at least not with words. A low hum threaded through the air, resonating from one to another until it became a single, continuous note that filled the entire village. The sound was not loud. It was felt more than heard, a vibration that seemed to rest in my chest and flow out with every breath I took. I realized, after a moment, that my own breathing had already fallen into its rhythm. I walked among them slowly. No one turned to greet me, yet I never felt unseen. Every passing figure seemed to acknowledge my presence without looking directly at me, as if they had always known I would arrive. It felt less like entering a new place and more like returning to a place I had simply forgotten for a time. The sleepwalkers moved with a kind of grace that was not practiced but natural, their bodies swaying slightly to the rhythm of the hum. Now and then, two would pass each other and share a faint smile without breaking their trance. Some carried small bundles of flowers that glowed faintly, petals trembling in the night air. Others held nothing at all, their hands open and relaxed at their sides. The scent in the air was mild but distinct, something like warmed milk, mingled with the freshness of rain that had fallen long ago. I found myself breathing it in deeply, my steps matching the houses opened here and there into small courtyards where soft cushions lay scattered. And in each courtyard, one or two sleepwalkers would be seated, eyes closed, swaying gently as if listening to something far away. I realized I could no longer hear the river. Its voice had been replaced entirely by the low, resonant hum that wrapped the whole village in a single, unbroken thread. Eventually, the narrow paths began to widen, drawing all movement toward a central space. The hum deepened as we neared it, vibrating in a way that made the ground seem softer beneath my feet. And then, the plaza opened before me. At its center stood the moon crystal. It was vast, taller than any building in the village, its surface smooth, yet faintly faceted, as if shaped by the slow touch of time rather than tools. The crystal glowed with a light that felt alive, pale and silvery at its heart, but with soft pulses of warmth that moved outward like a slow heartbeat. It did not shine with blinding brilliance. Instead, its glow spread gently through the air, making every shadow seem less like darkness and more like a place where light was resting. The sleepwalkers gathered around it in loose circles, never crowding, each finding a place where they could see and be near without touching. They stood or sat in silence, eyes half-lidded, breathing in unison. I could feel the hum in the air, deepening here, drawn up from the ground and flowing outward from the crystal, as though the two were exchanging their quiet energy. I moved closer, feeling no need to rush. The nearer I came, the more it felt as if the crystal's light was not simply falling upon me, but entering me, filling the spaces between my thoughts, softening the edges of everything I had been carrying. When I reached the innermost ring of the gathering, I stopped and let myself be still. My eyes were half closed now, too, though I had not chosen it. It was simply the natural way to be here. My breathing slowed again, matching the quiet pulse of the light. Around me, the others swayed gently, the motion so slight it was almost imperceptible, like the way a tree moves when only the highest leaves catch the wind. There was no ceremony, no beginning or end, no words to mark what this moment was. Yet I understood it perfectly. We were here to be part of the crystal's dreaming. The light and the hum seemed to pass through each of us in turn, as if we were helping carry it, each adding our own breath, our own stillness to its endless rhythm. And in that rhythm, I felt the truth I had been circling since my journey began. I was not an outsider here. This place had always been waiting, patient as moonlight on still water. My feet had always been walking toward it, even before I knew the path existed. Somewhere within me, the hum continued, even when I could no longer tell if it was coming from the crystal or from my own body. The plaza was a cradle, the crystal its silent guardian, and the night around us a soft blanket drawn close. I stayed there, eyes half closed, swaying with the others, until time itself seemed to lose its meaning, until all that remained was the gentle pulse of light, the unbroken hum, and the feeling of belonging, as deep and steady as the moon above. The crystal's hum was not a sound I heard, so much as a presence that entered me and began to live there. It rose from the ground in a deep, slow vibration, passing first through my feet, then up my legs, my spine, until it reached the space behind my eyes. There it seemed to settle, resonating in quiet, steady pulses that sped out through my whole body. I could feel it in my bones, in the air between my fingers, even in the space behind my breath. There was no urgency to it, only a constant, patient rhythm, as though the crystal had been humming for 1,000 years before my arrival, and would hum for 1,000 more after I was gone. The longer I stood near it, the less my own sense of time mattered. It was as though the rhythm had replaced the clock I carried inside me. My heartbeat seemed to shift, falling in step with the hum. My breath slowed until I could hardly tell where one inhale ended and the next began. All around, the sleepwalkers swayed in perfect stillness. Their movements so subtle, they could have been the drifting of shadows. Their breathing had joined the hum as well, and in a way I could not explain. Mine had too. We were no longer separate voices. We were one sound, one unbroken note. When I finally sat down beside the crystal, I felt the ground as more than a surface. It was warm, the warmth of something that had held sunlight in its heart for centuries. I leaned back until my spine touched the smooth curve of the crystal's base. The hum became even stronger there, so close to its source. I could feel it filling me with each slow pulse, making my body lighter, my thoughts quieter. My eyes began somewhere far away, or perhaps very close. The hum shifted slightly, deepening, becoming a fraction lower. It was not a change, so much as the next slow breath in an endless song. My own breathing followed without thinking, as if my lungs had always known this melody. I began to notice the way the sound lived in the spaces between heartbeats. It was there in the gentle pause after an exhale, in the faint vibration of my fingertips resting against the ground, in the air drifting past my skin. Every part of me seemed to hum in return. I fought for a moment that I might be falling asleep, but no, it was different. Sleep would have taken me away from this place. This feeling was drawing me deeper into it. I was not drifting out of the moment, but sinking further into it, as if the crystal song were a tide, and I had finally let it carry me. The sleepwalker's hum merged seamlessly with the crystals, and I could no longer tell who was following whom. Perhaps we were all following something older, something that had been here before any of us. My eyelids felt heavier still, yet my body lighter than air. I imagined that if I let go of the ground entirely, I might float upward like a strand of mist, still bound to the hum by an invisible thread. The crystal's light pulsed again, faint but steady, each pulse a reminder that there was no need to move, no need to do anything but be. It did not matter how long I stayed here. The concept of long had become meaningless. This could be a single breath or 1,000 nights, and I would not have known the difference. Somewhere beyond the village, the river still flowed, the clouds still drifted, the stars still moved, but none of that felt separate from me anymore. The hum tied it all together. It was in the silver mist on the water, in the slow bending of the dream trees, in the distant hills glowing under moonlight. It was in my chest, in my quiet pulse, in the warm cradle of the earth beneath me. I let my head rest fully against the crystal. My breathing slowed again, until it felt less like something I was doing and more like something the crystal was doing for me. Each inhale and exhale perfectly in tune with its song. The sleepwalkers did not move away, nor did they draw closer. They remained where they were, a gentle ring of breathing bodies, their presence like a soft wall that kept the world outside from intruding. The hum deepened once more, and I thought I felt a faint echo of my... I rose from the base of the moon crystal, as if from the deepest of wells, my body moving without thought, carried upward by something softer than air. The hum still lingered in me, slow and resonant, like a quiet thread tying my breath to the heart of the village. Even as my steps carried me away, the sound remained inside, steady and patient. The path ahead was not the same as when I had first walked it, or perhaps it was, but my eyes had changed. Everything now seemed dream-soaked. Edges softened into gentle blurs, as though the night itself had dipped its brush in water and let the shapes bleed into one another. The air had grown thick with stillness, yet it did not weigh me down. If anything, I felt lighter than before, almost buoyant, my feet grazing the ground as though testing whether to leave it entirely. The village's rounded houses faded behind me, their soft glow becoming a memory more than a sight. Ahead, the river of moonlight appeared again, flowing in its unhurried way, silver curling over silver. This time, I did not follow its bank. I simply crossed it. Stepping onto a bridge, I could not recall being there. It seemed to rise from the water itself, a faint arch of light that melted back into mist after I passed. On the far side, the land opened into the wide meadow I remembered, though now it seemed quieter, its glowing grasses swaying more slowly than before, as if in some deeper sleep. The air was warmer here, the scent of night flowers a little sweeter, a little fainter, like the fading echo of a song. I let my hands trail through the grass as I walked, each blade brushing my skin with the gentlest touch. Past the meadow lay the shore, the very one where I had first arrived on this planet. The sand was just as pale, the water just as still and midnight purple. Yet it felt different in my eyes. The waves no longer seemed frozen. They moved, but so imperceptibly that I could not tell whether I saw them or only imagined them. The hum of the dream trees was still there too, though now it felt like part of the wind, part of the rhythm that had settled deep in my bones. I paused, breathing in the air. Every step I took seemed to leave no trace, as if I were walking not through the world, but through its reflection. The sky above was darker now, yet filled with more light, not from the moon or any one star, but from countless faint, drifting glimmers, as if the stars themselves were blurring into soft clouds. The starlit path reappeared, the same one I had followed long ago, or perhaps only moments ago, time being so loose now. Each star embedded in it shone dimly, pulsing faintly in rhythm with my own breath. The ground here was so light beneath my feet that I wondered whether I was walking at all, or simply being carried forward on the quiet current of a dream. I did not hurry. There was no need. Every place I came to felt like it was waiting, not for my arrival, but simply to exist. My breath slowed again. The hum of the crystal was now only a memory, yet it was also here, in the movement of the air, in the way my heartbeat felt steady and unhurried. I understood then that I was not walking back to where I began. I was walking into the dream I would carry with me, one that would follow me into sleep, and perhaps into waking. The meadow, the shore, the starlit path, they all blurred a little more with each step, until they felt less like places I could visit, and more like pieces of a quiet thought that would live inside me forever. I kept moving, slower than ever, almost weightless now, the air around me warm and calm. The dream did not close behind me. It simply expanded, stretching far beyond sight, its edges fading into a horizon that no longer seemed to end. The journey was ending. The journey was continuing. And somewhere, deep inside, I knew they were the same thing. The boat was waiting for me. It sat where the water met the shore, rocking with the smallest of motions, as if it had been resting all this time, patient and unhurried. The silver of its hull caught the dim light of the lake, not bright now, but muted, softened, like moonlight seen through closed eyelids. I stepped inside without a sound, and the boat responded with a slow sway, as though acknowledging my return. The wood beneath me felt warmer than I remembered, and the air around it carried a faint scent of the lake, cool, faintly metallic, and somehow clean in a way that made my lungs feel weightless. The oars were there, set in their places, yet I did not touch them. I knew I wouldn't need to. The lake had its own will, its own quiet current, and I felt certain it would take me where I needed to go. The water's glow had changed since my first crossing. It was softer now, more like the gentle gleam of distant stars than the bright shimmer I had seen before. The ripples spread out from the boat in slow, deliberate circles, each one fading into the darkness without a sound. Above me, the stars were no longer sharp points, but slow-moving embers, drifting across a sky, deepening toward black velvet. They seemed to have all the time in the world, each taking its own unhurried path. Some were faint, barely visible. Others were larger, glowing gently, as if watching over the crossing. The lake felt wider this time, as though it had stretched itself to hold me in its calm for longer. There was no rush. My breaths matched its rhythm, slow in, slow out, and each exhale seemed to sink into the water, joining its steady pulse. The sound of the boat's gentle rocking was almost hypnotic. A small creak here, a soft brush of water against its sides there. I leaned back slightly, letting my gaze settle into the vastness above, and time loosened even further, spilling into something formless. Occasionally, a faint shimmer would drift upward from the lake's surface, like a bubble of light breaking free. They would rise only a little before dissolving into the night, leaving the air tinged with a cool scent, weightless feeling. I watched them without thought, letting their small, aimless journeys mirror my own. There was no horizon now, or perhaps I had simply stopped trying to find it. The far shore might have been somewhere ahead, or somewhere behind, or nowhere at all. I felt suspended in the middle of something endless, yet utterly at peace. My hands rested loosely in my lap. My eyes closed and opened without deciding to. The darkness deepened, and the glow of the lake softened even more, as though the water itself were preparing for sleep. Somewhere in this stillness, I began to feel the faintest change, not in the water's motion, but in the air. A subtle warmth, a quiet familiarity, as if I were approaching something that had been waiting. I could not see the shore yet, but its presence was there, like the memory of a scent before you breathe it in. The boat slowed, though I hadn't felt it moving. The glow of the lake faded further, until it was only a suggestion beneath the surface. The stars above shifted lazily, some disappearing behind soft clouds that I had not noticed forming. Then, almost without knowing how, I realized we had arrived. The shore was there, close enough to step onto, yet I could not recall seeing it approach. It was as if it had simply appeared, or perhaps the boat had always been here, and the crossing had been a dream. I rose slowly, my movements matching the stillness around me. My feet touched the shore, and the ground felt steady, warm, and patient. Behind me, the boat rocked once, twice, and then stilled completely. as though settling back into its long, quiet wait. I stood for a moment, looking out at the silver lake, dim now, calm and holding its light close. The stars above moved on in their slow arcs, and the night's air carried a softness that seemed to settle over everything. The crossing was done. The stillness remained. The path was waiting for me. A ribbon of silver light stretched out ahead, laid gently over the earth, as if the moon herself had placed it there to guide me. It shimmered faintly, not bright, but with the kind of glow that seemed to breathe in and out, fading, returning, fading again, like a slow heartbeat in the night. I stepped onto it, and the ground felt different here, as though it remembered my footsteps from before. Each step sank softly into the light, without leaving a mark, as if I were walking over something not entirely of this world. The air carried the faintest scent of flowers. I could not place them, maybe something that bloomed only in dreams, but their sweetness was quieter now, as if the petals were folded, sleeping. I breathed it in carefully, not wanting to disturb the stillness. All around, the night had grown deeper. Shapes of trees and distant hills lingered at the edges of my sight, softened to gentle outlines. The stars above no longer seemed to shine from far away. They felt closer, warmer, as though they had been following me all along. Sounds had nearly vanished. Even my footsteps made no real noise, only the ghost of a sound, too faint to hold on to. Somewhere, far behind, I thought I heard the slow ripple of the lake, but it was already fading. Like a dream you can't quite recall upon waking, I walked slower, not because I was tired, but because the path seemed to ask for it. My steps became smaller, lighter, until I almost felt as if I were gliding. The silver light welcomed each footfall, holding it for a moment before letting it go. Somewhere ahead, a small, warm glow appeared. It was gentle at first, like a firefly hovering in the dark. But as I drew nearer, it began to take shape. A window. A single window glowing faintly, as though someone had left a light burning for me. The sight of it loosened something inside me, a sense of recognition that felt older than memory. The glow wasn't bright. It didn't need to be. It was simply there, steady and quiet, like the idea of home itself. The path curved slightly, and the silver light grew thinner, as if it were blending into the air. My steps slowed further still, until I was barely moving. The night seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for me to arrive. Each step was its own small world now. My foot lifting, touching down. My breath rising, falling. Time dissolving between one moment and the next. The scents were almost gone. The sounds long since faded. And all that remained was the glow ahead, that soft, waiting light in the window. The closer I came, the more the rest of the world seemed to blur. The trees became gentle shadows, the stars a quiet shimmer above. Even the silver of the path was fading beneath my feet, as if its work was nearly done. And then I was there. I stood for a moment, looking at that warm square of light, feeling the stillness settle around me like a blanket. My last step onto the threshold was the slowest of all, and when my foot touched down, the silver path behind me seemed to vanish into the night, leaving only the soft glow of home ahead. I am home. The sheets are cool against my skin as I lower myself into bed. The mattress receives me without resistance, its quiet weight rising up to meet mine. I do not remember how I came here, only that I am here now, and I do not need to move again. My head finds the pillow as though it has been waiting, shaped to hold me in its familiar hollow. I let my arms rest where they fall. My legs loosen. My body sinks deeper, as though the bed is gently pulling me toward its center. Breath in, breath out. Thoughts pass through, but they do not stay. One drifts in, a fragment of a place I have been, and then it floats away again, like a petal on a river, too slow to make a sound. Another comes, a half-formed word, a shadow of a memory, and it too slips out of reach before I can turn toward it. The moon is at my window. I feel her there, her light touching the edges of the room. She says nothing, but I sense her watching, keeping the night in place while I sink further into its depths. Her glow is soft, neither bright nor dim, a steady presence in the quiet. My breaths are longer now, my thoughts smaller. A pause between one moment and the warmth of the bed spreads up from beneath me, across my back, my shoulders, my neck. My fingers feel light, almost distant, as though I could forget they are there. In the stillness, even my own heartbeat feels unhurried, like a drum heard from far away. Another breath in, a longer breath out. Words begin to fade before I can think them. Sentences shorten, only shapes remain. A curtain moving slightly in the night air. A shadow resting in the corner of the room. The silver edge of the moon in the window. My eyes close without asking. The world softens. Silence fills the spaces between everything. And then, even silence becomes too much to hold. I let go. I fall away. And I sleep.